She had no idea her life was about to change forever, just because of a seat on a plane. Margaret had always loved the idea of flying, though it was something she didn't often get to experience. At 75 years old, her adventures were fewer, but the ones she did take were always memorable. This time, however, was different. This time, it was her dream trip to visit her son Keanu in the lush hills of California. Her heart raced as she arrived at the airport, carefully clutching the boarding pass she'd received with excitement. A flight to first class was an unexpected treat, a rare gift from her son, who insisted she travel comfortably after her recent knee surgery. For Margaret, this wasn't just any ordinary journey. This was a symbol of her son's care, of the time he'd made for her after years of distance. It was a chance to see him again, to finally meet his friends, and to share moments that would only happen once in a lifetime. If you're curious to see how this unexpected journey unfolds and what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button. The rest of Margaret's story is just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. As she made her way to the check-in counter, her fragile frame was a stark contrast to the busy airport environment. The modernity of the glass terminals and sleek digital screens made her feel small, as though she were a visitor in a world she didn't quite belong to. She smiled politely at the young staff members behind the counter, eager to present her ticket and take her first steps into the luxurious world of first-class travel. "Here's your boarding pass," she said with a gentle voice. The attendant's eyes skimmed her, offering a perfunctory smile before asking her to step aside. Margaret's fingers tightened around her handbag, her excitement now mixing with a bit of confusion. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she took her place near the gate, waiting for the moment when her journey would begin. But instead of the welcome she imagined, the next few minutes unfolded into something entirely different. The airline staff, with their crisp uniforms and impatient demeanor, started murmuring amongst themselves. They glanced at Margaret, then at her ticket, and then exchanged a look that sent a wave of unease through her. One of them stepped forward, his voice curt as he addressed her. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we need you to move to the back of the line. You're not eligible for a first-class seat." Margaret blinked, trying to process the words. "But my son, he made the arrangements for me," she stammered, her voice soft but filled with a genuine confusion. The attendant rolled his eyes slightly and sighed. "I'm afraid that's not our concern. Please step aside." Margaret's heart sank. The excitement she had carried with her for the past week now felt like a distant memory. Her stomach turned in knots as the staff continued to ignore her, each moment growing more uncomfortable. Little did they know they were making a grave mistake, one that would soon have consequences they could never have imagined. As Margaret stood there, looking helplessly around the busy terminal, she had no idea that her son, Keanu Reeves, the owner of the airline, was watching everything unfold from his private office. Margaret stood at the counter, her hands now trembling slightly as she clutched her boarding pass. Her eyes followed the attendant's dismissive gaze as he barely looked at her while speaking. The excitement she had felt only moments ago had turned into a cold feeling of confusion and frustration. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move along," the attendant said, his voice a mix of impatience and cold indifference. "Pardon me, but I'm supposed to be in first class," Margaret replied, her voice quiet but firm. Her mind was still struggling to grasp what was happening. How could this be? She had received a special boarding pass just days before from her son Keanu. Why was she being treated like this? Was it a mistake? "I don't know who you think you are, but you're not sitting here," the attendant snapped, clearly agitated by her persistence. Margaret felt a deep flush of embarrassment rising to her cheeks. She glanced around, feeling the stares of other passengers, but none of them seemed to care enough to offer her any assistance. They were all too busy with their own lives, too wrapped up in their phones, their conversations, their pre-flight anxiety. She tried again, her voice shaking. "Please, I need to speak to a supervisor. My son arranged this for me, and he's..." The attendant interrupted her before she could finish. "Listen, lady, I don't know what story you're trying to spin here, but this is a first-class seat we're talking about, and you're not going to sit in it. We have rules." Margaret took a deep breath, the air thick with the tension she felt rising in her chest. She could feel the weight of his words, and the cold way in which they were delivered, like a slap across her face. But the truth was, she didn't understand why this was happening. She hadn't done anything wrong. Her son had made sure she had everything she needed for this trip. Why wasn't she being treated with the respect she deserved? "Please," Margaret pleaded again, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I just need to speak with someone. This isn't right." The attendant's eyes hardened as he glanced at her with a look that could only be described as dismissive. He didn't care. He didn't care about the elderly woman standing before him, or the fact that she was now becoming visibly upset. His job, his world, was far more important than this frail, vulnerable woman. The rules were the rules, and he wasn't going to let anyone bend them, especially not her. "Ma'am, step aside," he ordered, his tone as sharp as a knife. "You're delaying the boarding process. Move." Margaret's breath hitched in her throat as the tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't know what to do anymore. Every word from the attendant only deepened her sense of humiliation. She had never felt so powerless. This wasn't how she had imagined her trip. This wasn't how she had imagined her relationship with her son being treated by the world. But here she was, a mere inconvenience to this stranger who held all the power in this small, cold space. She stepped aside reluctantly, her shoulders hunched with defeat. As the attendant walked away, she turned to find a seat, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. How could they do this to her? She was just trying to visit her son. She didn't deserve this treatment. But little did she know, things were about to get far more complicated than she could ever have imagined. Keanu Reeves sat in the back of his sleek private plane, the hum of the engine a constant calming sound in the background. The large windows offered a stunning view of the sky, a vast, endless expanse that seemed to echo the thoughts running through his head. He glanced down at the laptop screen in front of him, his fingers idly tapping the edge of the desk as he watched the live surveillance feeds coming from his airline's terminals. He wasn't just a celebrity or an actor, he was a businessman, an owner, a protector. This wasn't his usual routine. He was on a business trip, but his eyes were glued to the monitors, checking the status of operations at one of his most important terminals. His company wasn't just a source of income, it was a reflection of his values. He believed in treating people well, in respecting others, in upholding the dignity of those around him, and as the owner of the airline, he expected nothing less from his staff. He clicked on a new window and scrolled through some reports when something caught his attention. A camera feed blinked on, showing a dispute at one of the check-in counters. His heart sank as he recognized the woman standing there. It was his mother, Margaret. His hand paused in mid-air, his mind racing. What was going on? He watched as the camera zoomed in on the interaction, catching every moment of the exchange between her and the rude attendant. It was unmistakable. The man's demeanor was harsh, dismissive, completely uncalled for. The more he watched, the angrier he became. The way the attendant spoke to his mother, the lack of respect, the complete disregard for her age and vulnerability, it hit him like a punch to the gut. Why hadn't anyone stepped in? Why wasn't she being treated the way she deserved? Keanu's fingers clenched into fists. He wasn't just watching, he was feeling everything she was. Her confusion, her frustration, her humiliation. He could see it in her eyes, the shock, the disbelief that anyone would treat her like this. And the more he saw, the more determined he became. But Keanu wasn't the type to act impulsively. He didn't like to intervene immediately, preferring to observe and gather all the facts before making a decision. He wanted to see if anyone else would step in, if the airline staff would realize their mistake. But the longer the interaction went on, the clearer it became that no one was going to help. The attendant was too proud, too self-absorbed in his own sense of importance. Keanu could see that. The staff's indifference was palpable. They didn't know who they were dealing with, but soon they would. Keanu took a deep breath, his mind now set. He wasn't going to sit back any longer. His mother deserved better, and he was going to make sure she got it. The staff had no idea what was coming. Keanu watched for a few more moments before he stood up and walked to the cockpit, ready to take action. He knew exactly what he was going to do next. Margaret's frustration had reached its peak. She had been patient, she had pleaded, but now it was time to stand up for herself. She had every right to be in that seat. Her son Keanu had arranged everything for her. She wasn't just some random passenger who could be dismissed. She was a mother, a person with dignity, and no one, especially not this rude attendant, was going to take that away from her. As the attendant returned to the counter, Margaret approached him. Her steps were slow but firm, and her voice, though fragile, held a new strength. "Excuse me," she began, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that surprised even her. "I need you to explain why you won't let me board first class. My son arranged this for me. I don't understand what the problem is." The attendant, clearly irritated by her persistence, barely glanced up. "I've told you, Mum, the seat is not available. You're not authorized to be in first class. It's just the way things are." His tone was dripping with condescension. Margaret's heart pounded in her chest. How could he speak to her like that? Was it because of her age? Or perhaps it was because of the way she looked? Frail, older, out of place in this modern world? Whatever the reason, it didn't matter. She had earned her seat. She had earned respect. "I don't think you understand," Margaret said, trying to steady her voice. "My son, Keanu Reeves, arranged this. He owns this airline." The words felt strange coming from her, but they were the truth. The attendant's eyes flicked to her, a small, almost mocking smile creeping across his face. "Oh, really? That's quite a claim, Ma'am, and I'm supposed to believe you?" He laughed softly under his breath, clearly dismissive. Margaret's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles turning white. "I'm telling you the truth," she insisted. "You need to fix this now. I'm not going anywhere until you do." The attendant, now visibly annoyed, straightened his posture. "Listen, I don't have time for this. We have rules and your son doesn't get to make them." He waved his hand dismissively as if swatting a fly. "Now, move along, or I'll have to call security." Margaret's stomach twisted. The more he spoke, the more she realized just how small and insignificant she felt in this world. Why was he treating her like this? She wasn't an inconvenience. She wasn't just a problem to be pushed aside, but every word that came from his mouth was designed to break her down, to make her feel less than. His arrogance was like a slap, but Margaret wasn't going to let him win. Not today. She stood there, unmoving, refusing to back down. "I don't care what your rules are," she said quietly but firmly. "I'm not going anywhere until you show me the respect I deserve, and if you won't do that, I'll find someone who will." The attendant's face tightened and his eyes narrowed. "You're wasting my time, old woman. Move." His tone was harsh, dismissive. Keanu, sitting far away, had been watching every moment unfold on the screen in front of him, his jaw clenched in anger. His mother didn't deserve this. The staff's behaviour was nothing short of appalling, and every time they dismissed her, it cut him deeper. He wanted to step in immediately, to confront the staff and make them apologise, but something told him to hold back just a little longer. Let this moment unfold. Let them dig their own hole. Margaret, however, wasn't about to let the situation escalate any further. Her patience was running thin, and she had no intention of allowing the attendant to dismiss her again. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice shaking, but resolute. "And you'll regret treating me like this." The moment Keanu had been waiting for had finally arrived. He could see it all unfold before him. The rude treatment, the escalating tension. His mother was more than just a passenger. She was the heart of his world, and no one, least of all some arrogant airline staff, was going to make her feel insignificant. Keanu had built his empire not just on hard work, but on values, respect, dignity, kindness. The way the attendant treated his mother went against everything he stood for, everything he had built. He stood up from his seat, his posture commanding, his presence undeniable. He walked toward the front of the plane, the sounds of the engines buzzing in his ears. The closer he got to the gate, the more his anger simmered. The staff didn't know who they were dealing with. They didn't realize the mistake they were making. As Keanu reached the gate, he paused just behind a wall of windows. From here, he could still see everything, could still see the poor treatment his mother was enduring. The attendant's voice carried through the terminal, still mocking her, still dismissive. But then, Keanu stepped into view, walking confidently towards them. The moment the attendant caught sight of him, his smile faltered, his confidence crumbling like a sandcastle under a wave. Keanu's eyes locked onto the attendant, his gaze cold and unwavering. The staff member's face went pale, the realization hitting him like a freight train. He hadn't just been rude to any passenger, he'd been rude to the owner of the airline. "Excuse me," Keanu said, his voice low but full of authority, "but I think there's been some misunderstanding." The attendant's face turned a deeper shade of red, panic setting in. He stammered for a moment, fumbling for words. Mr. Reeves, I didn't know. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "Number you didn't, but now you do." He gestured toward his mother, still standing there, her posture tense but dignified. "This is my mother, and she will be treated with the respect she deserves. You will not speak to her like that again." The attendant's hands shook slightly as he looked around, hoping for some form of backup, but there was none. Everyone had scattered. No one was willing to confront the man who owned the entire airline. Keanu stepped closer, his voice hardening with every word. "I built this airline with a foundation of respect, kindness, and service. You represent everything that goes against that. I will not tolerate it." The attendant stood frozen, unable to respond. He had no words. He had no defense. He had been caught in his own arrogance. "Now," Keanu continued, "I expect you to apologize to my mother." Immediately. His eyes were sharp, filled with an intensity that left no room for negotiation. Margaret, watching from the corner, couldn't believe her eyes. There he was, her son, her Keanu, standing before the attendant, commanding the room. And for the first time since this whole ordeal started, Margaret felt a surge of pride. She wasn't alone. She wasn't powerless. The attendant mumbled an apology, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't realize." Keanu turned to him, his face unreadable. "You will learn to respect every passenger, no matter who they are. I don't care if they're a celebrity or a regular person. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity." He turned back to Margaret, his expression softening. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this, Mum. Let's get you to your seat." Keanu then nodded toward the attendant one last time. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." The attendant, humiliated and chastised, stood frozen in place as Keanu led Margaret to the first-class cabin. The tension had been cut, the power dynamic irrevocably shifted. Keanu had acted decisively, and the staff member had learned a hard lesson. As they walked through the first-class cabin, Keanu held the door open for his mother, his protective gaze never leaving her. "I'm here for you, Mom," he said quietly. Margaret smiled softly, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew now more than ever that no one would ever make her feel small again, not as long as she had Keanu by her side. The plane was now cruising high above the clouds, its engines humming steadily as the miles passed beneath. Inside, everything was calm, except for the intense silence that hung over the gate area where the incident had just unfolded. Keanu had made sure his mother, Margaret, was settled into the first-class seat she deserved. He had personally ensured that the staff in the cabin treated her with nothing but the utmost respect. As he walked back down the aisle, he glanced over to see his mother smiling softly, her once tense posture now relaxed. She looked out the window, a contented look crossing her face. The flight attendants, who had initially turned a blind eye to her, were now more attentive. One had even offered her a glass of champagne, apologizing for the incident that had occurred earlier. Margaret, still trying to process the events, accepted the gesture with a gracious smile, but she couldn't shake the feeling of how out of place the earlier rudeness had felt. But that was in the past now. Keanu's mind wasn't finished with it yet. He couldn't simply let it slide. His mother deserved better, and the staff would learn that it wasn't just about the rules. It was about treating people with dignity. As he walked toward the cockpit to check in with the flight crew, he took one last look at the staff members who had witnessed everything. They were no longer laughing or dismissing his mother. Instead, they were quietly working, their movements more cautious, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Keanu turned his attention to the flight manager. "I'd like to speak to the staff that was involved in the situation earlier," he said, his voice calm but firm. The flight manager, who had been standing at the back of the cabin, turned pale at the request. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. I'll have them meet you in the lounge area right away." Keanu nodded and walked to the lounge, his steps purposeful. He was aware that his presence was enough to send a wave of discomfort through anyone who had wronged his family, and this would be no different. As the staff trickled in, they stood in front of him, avoiding eye contact. The room was thick with the tension of their guilt. "Do you know who that woman was?" Keanu began, his voice steady and controlled. "She's not just anyone. She's my mother, and you disrespected her. You treated her like she was invisible, like she didn't matter." The staff shifted uncomfortably. One of them spoke up, his voice a weak attempt at defense. "Mr. Reeves, we didn't know. We had no idea she was your mother. If we had known..." Keanu raised his hand to stop him. It shouldn't have mattered. No one deserves to be treated that way. Whether you know their name or not, the person sitting in front of you should always be treated with respect. Always. He paced slowly, his presence demanding their full attention. "This airline is built on a foundation of service. We don't just move people from one place to another. We provide them with respect. You need to understand that. And next time, I don't care who they are, they will get that respect." The room was silent. Each staff member stood frozen, their eyes now trained on the floor. They were ashamed. They knew they had been caught in their arrogance and had been shown the true power of kindness and respect. Keanu didn't raise his voice, but his words hit like a hammer. He wasn't here to make threats, but to teach. "I'm not going to fire any of you, but consider this your warning. You will remember today, and you will think twice before treating anyone like that again, especially my mother." With one final look at the staff, Keanu turned and left the room. He wasn't angry. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was simply ensuring that his message was clear, that his values would never be compromised. As he walked back to the front cabin, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. The staff had been reprimanded, but he knew the real change had to come from within them. They would remember today, and that was enough. When Keanu returned to his seat, he found Margaret in a much better mood. She was reading a magazine, the small tension that had gripped her earlier now replaced with a smile. She looked up at him and, in that moment, everything felt right again. She had her seat, she had her dignity, and above all, she had her son by her side. Keanu gave her a nod, his heart swelling with pride. He had done what he had to do, both as a son and as the owner of the airline. He had ensured justice was served, but more importantly, he had protected what mattered most. As the plane sailed smoothly through the sky, Margaret leaned back in her seat, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. She had been through a lot that day, an unsettling experience that could have ruined her trip, but it didn't. It couldn't. Not as long as she had her son by her side. The flight would continue, the hours would pass, but Margaret knew that nothing could take away the lesson she had learned. She wasn't invisible, she wasn't disposable, and neither was anyone else. Everyone deserved respect, and Keanu had just shown her that sometimes standing up for what's right meant more than anything else. Keanu sat beside her, looking out of the window at the vast expanse below. In that quiet moment, he reflected on what had just happened. He hadn't just protected his mother, he had protected the very values that had shaped him as a person. The values of kindness, empathy, and respect. These were the pillars upon which he had built everything, and today, He had reinforced them in a way that would echo for much longer than any reprimand or punishment could. The staff would learn, he knew. But more importantly, this moment would be a reminder for everyone. Sometimes, standing up for the people you love means changing the way the world works. It means showing up for them when they need it most. It means doing what's right, even when it's hard. Keanu turned to Margaret, a smile playing on his lips. "You okay, Mom?" Margaret smiled back, her eyes twinkling with a quiet understanding. "I am now, sweetheart. I am now." And as they both sat in peaceful silence, the flight continued on, a journey not just across the sky, but one of respect, love, and a deep bond between a mother and her son. If you enjoyed this story and believe in the power of family and respect, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more heartfelt stories like this. We've got plenty more to share, and we'd love to have you along for the ride. Thanks for watching, and take care.